Students, this week you're going to put together everything you've learned thus far and write your very first lesson plan for this course. So in this case, it's going to be language and literacy. So you can see here the example of the lesson plan template that is here in your module. It's worth 40 points. You can see all of the different sections. So it's pretty comprehensive, and it's going to prepare you to create an engaging, developmentally appropriate lesson plan for a child age 3, 4, or 5 years old. So think about one of the children that you observed in the assessment and the observation and assessment assignment, and you're going to develop your lesson plan with that child in mind. So if you remember, we recently did the observation and assessment assignment, and you were able to take a look at all of these videos and focus on one of the children in each observation. So you had Austin and Sander, Asia and Lyric, Amber, Alicia, Adrian, Wyatt, and Draco. So think about one of these children that you observed, and you're going to use that child's needs, desires, interests, developmental level as sort of the inspiration for your language and literacy lesson plan. Sound good? Okay, so we're going to go back. In one of our previous modules, we had this page titled Lecture Lesson Plan Guidelines Template. So this goes into a lot of detail about each section of your lesson plan. So please take some time to review that because it will let you know what you need to do in each section. So CD7 and CD8 are pretty much two halves of the same coin. So you are going to be following the same guidelines that you would for CD7. So the lesson plan template that we saw on this page, I'm going to go over the details over here. So obviously the top, your name, curriculum area, what subject will you be covering? In this case, it's going to be language or literacy. Activity name, what are you going to call it? What are the ages? So you're going to select ages 3, 4, or 5. Now for the DRDP, you're going to focus on the DRDP website. So here are the domains of the DRDP. So on your lesson plan template, you can see here, you have all of these different categories. Okay, so is it English language development? Is it history and social studies, social emotional development, visual and performing arts, cognitive, literacy, language development? Is it approaches to learning, self-regulation? Okay, so you have all of those different options in the section, so you're going to mark it off. Okay, for this section, for equity, diversity, and social justice, think about, now it doesn't have to mean that your lesson plan is on an equity or social justice topic. It just is asking you to think about how are you making sure that your lesson is equitable, or how are you making sure that your lesson plan is through a social justice lens, or that you're addressing the diverse needs of your students. So for example, that can be demonstrated in the book that you're choosing to incorporate into your lesson plan. Maybe the book shows diverse children. Maybe in the accommodations part down below, that's how you're addressing, because you are developing accommodations or modifications for diverse learners in your classroom. So maybe you can embed that there. Maybe you are having students work together to help each other in different levels. Maybe you are including some English language development support for your English language learners. So there are a lot of different ways that you can think about how to include equity, diversity, and social justice into your lesson plan. Those were just a few examples that I'm sharing. Okay, so back to our detailed instructions here. For Bloom's taxonomy, you're going to check which level you're going to focus on in the lesson plan. Multiple intelligences, same thing. Now all of these things are in previous modules. I've given lectures, and there's content pages that go through all of these things if you're not sure. So you're going to check which of the multiple intelligences, which levels you're going to focus on in the lesson plan. This entire section is worth 1 point. So if you're missing any one item in that section, then you won't receive a point. So make sure you go through all of those basic steps very carefully. Okay. Overarching goal, that's the goal of your entire unit. This stays the same throughout all of your lesson plans for this unit or thematic unit. So what is your overarching goal? In this part, you'll only need to write one sentence informing the reader what your reason to teach this theme or unit. What did you want your students to learn from this unit? Okay, and then your behavioral instructional objective. This is extremely important because this is basically the backbone or roadmap or blueprint for your entire lesson. So there's a lot of information in this module about how to write a behavioral or instructional objective, and you'll also have a mini quiz to make sure that you understand what it is that you need to do. So make sure that your instructional objective has all of these different parts. So by the end of the lesson, what concept, information, skill, or strategy do you want the students to obtain, and how will they demonstrate that knowledge? Use Bloom's words to create your sentences. So you're going to need to write 2 behavioral objectives. Please avoid words like learn, understand, or comprehend because those are not observable or measurable. How do you know if a student has learned something, right? They have to do something specific in order to demonstrate that they've learned something. How do you know a child has understand something, right? They have to demonstrate in a tangible, concrete way that they understand what you've taught them, right? So please make sure that your objectives are very specific and measurable and avoid these words. Refer to your Bloom's taxonomy list. You can use this objective formula sentence to help you write your objective. Students will insert Bloom's word by, include how they will show you. For example, students will utilize their gross motor skills when hopping on one foot. All right, now for your assessment, this is also really important because this is how you're going to determine if the student has met the learning or behavioral objective. So how are you going to assess or evaluate? What specific tangible evidence will the child need to show that they've met these 2 types of objectives? So each assessment must be tied to the objective above. You will have 2 written assessments. You must let the reader know what the student will be able to do and give a specific number of how many ways they will show this. So for example, using the example above, students will be able to utilize their gross motor skills by hopping at least 3 times on one foot. Now this section is also very important. You're noticing a theme here. So making sure that we are addressing the diverse needs of students in our classroom, right? We want to make sure that we are inclusive and that students who are uniquely abled or who learn differently, that we have accommodations for them in our lesson. So how will you accommodate your assessments so that all students will be able to meet your objective and to make sure your objective was obtained? So you're going to make sure that you are accommodating the assessment above so that all children can be successful. So for example, using the same example above, students will utilize their gross motor skills by hopping at least 1 time on one foot rather than the 3, right? So we're modifying the requirement, the frequency or the number of times they have to jump, or be able to move their arms up and down at least once if they are unable to move their lower body part. Okay, so that would be a way to accommodate a child who might not be able to move their lower extremities. For materials, you must have a book in all lesson plans. Okay, you don't necessarily have to read it as part of your lesson, but make sure that you have one in mind so that it reinforces the concepts that children are learning. Books can be a really, really engaging way to introduce a lesson. So please make sure that you include that. And we want to avoid worksheets. We want to have more hands-on, student-centered learning, and worksheets make it very difficult for us to have lessons that are engaging and student-centered and emergent curriculum, which is what we want to focus on in early education. So for your introduction, how are you engaging your students into your lesson? What is your opening to the lesson? State exactly what you will say to the students to begin your lesson. So this is when we're talking about a script. So word for word, what are you saying? Making sure that you're using quotation marks so that the reader knows exactly what needs to be said to the students. For the procedure, this needs to be as detailed as possible. You see that it's worth 6 points. Where are the children sitting? What is the teacher doing? How the lesson plan is being delivered to the students? All steps must be stated in a script. Okay, so make sure that you read all of these bullets and that you are as detailed as possible. For your closing, how will you bring closure to the lesson? And by doing so, review and determine what students have learned. Just like the introduction, you must state exactly how you will close the lesson. So you're wrapping it up. You might be repeating key points. You might be asking students some pointed questions to make sure that they understood the objective and that the objective was met. This might also be an opportunity to clarify confusions that students might have. This might be an opportunity to reiterate why this lesson was conducted and how they can apply the learning objectives into other areas of learning. So the closure is really an important part of your lesson too. Now the transition is something that we don't think about very often, but it's also a very important part of your lesson. So you're going to list the activity and what you will tell the students to transition them into your next activity. And this is important, especially for little ones who maybe have shorter attention spans. They need clear instructions on how to get from one activity to another. So one way to do this in an engaging and fun way is to include a song or a chant to have students sing as they transition to the next activity. Open-ended question section is worth 4 points. What are open-ended statements or divergent questions you might ask? You need to have at least 2 questions in your lesson. So open-ended or divergent means that they are not yes or no questions. They are questions that have multiple answers to allow students to think critically and to give you an array of responses. So please avoid yes or no questions. Something like, what did you like best about the story is much better than, did you like the story? Because students can say yes or no. Okay, so think about how you can have open-ended questions versus questions that will only have one answer or that will only have a yes or no response. And then finally, your vocabulary words. List new and or unique words that you will introduce to the child that relates to this activity. Include a child-friendly definition for each word. Okay, so you will introduce vocabulary to students in a developmentally appropriate manner. A minimum of 4 words must be introduced or reinforced with students. All right, so in a nutshell, that is your lesson plan, and I look forward to reading them. Have fun!